We really wanted to bring everybody together today for a discussion on disability inclusion, civil rights, and intersectionality. And we're really excited to have our panelists touch on this through their personal and professional lived experiences. And on our panel, we have Alex Locust, who is a certified rehabilitation counselor with the San Francisco AIDS Foundation and a proud multiracial glamputee, spreading the word about social justice one workshop at a time. Whether on the runway or in a counseling session, Alex aspires to emulate the tenacity of the trailblazers before him and fiercely advocates for equity in all community spaces. He graduated from San Francisco State University with an MS in clinical rehabilitation and mental health counseling. He is passionately committed to educating others on how to adopt a disability justice framework for community buildings and strives to empower other people with disabilities to feel included in the movement. We also have Tiffany Yu, who is the CEO and founder of Diversibility, an award-winning social enterprise to rebrand disability through the power of community, and is the founder of the awesome foundation Disability Chapter. She started her career in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, working on over $14 billion of announced transactions. She was appointed to the San Francisco Mayor's Disability Council by San Francisco Mayor London Breed in 2019, and has been featured in Forbes and has spoken at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, TEDx, and Stanford University. And we also have Judy Heumann with us today, who is recognized internationally as a leader in the disability community and is a lifelong civil rights activist. She led the 504 sit-in, which led to the signing of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which helped pave the way for the Americans with Disabilities Act. President Obama appointed Judy as the first special advisor for international disability rights at the U.S. Department of State, where she served from 2010 to 2017. And for more than 30 years, she has been involved in working with disabled people's organizations and governments around the world and has been instrumental in the implementation of legislation at the national level for programs in special education, disability research, vocational rehabilitation, and independent living. She most recently published a memoir of her life as a disability rights activist and was featured in Netflix movie Crip Camp, produced by Barack and Michelle Obama. So a very sincere thank you to the three of you for joining us here today and for opening up for this discussion. Judy, I first wanted to start with you to kick it off. Crip Camp, what an incredible movie and story. I absolutely loved it. It really just struck me on so many levels. And I was wondering, could you tell us more about your experience at Camp Gen Ed and what it meant to you and the disability community to see this movie produced and available to the public through such a large platform like Netflix?
Well, I think it's been incredible that Netflix and the Obamas really allowed this film to come to fruition. Jimmy LeBrecht, or Jim LeBrecht as he's known, or James LeBrecht as he's known to some, is really the moderator and one of the directors for Camp, and he had spina bifida and was born with spina bifida. I think the film itself, was really his vision in the beginning, because he is a professional, recognized sound engineer, and then a number of years ago decided that he really hadn't done much in the area of disability, and that camp had been a very important part of his life. And so he was able to get Nicole Newnham, who is also an award-winning director, and they had worked together to do Crip Camp. And you can see, for those of you who have watched it, and for those of you who haven't, I encourage you to watch it on Netflix. For me, it's really evokes incredible discussion and thinking. And what it allows us to do is really not only learn about an earlier period in the disability rights movement, it also allows us to look more in depth at issues around diversity and really organizing that was being done at that time with very little anything, money or structured organizations or anything. So for me, it also evokes a discussion around the camp, not just Gen Ed, but Gen Ed was a camp for disabled kids, and there were numbers of camps for disabled kids. One of the reasons for those camps was because we couldn't go to the regular camps. And, you know, there was no thought behind these camps from administration that it would allow us to really look at the development of a disability culture. And I think that's really what emanated from numbers of segregated environments that we were in. And looking at it from today's perspective, how we enable those kinds of experiences to happen, where people can really get to know each other in a more in-depth way, I think is very important. Because for me, one of the things that went on at that camp, and I was a teenager, so, I started as a teenager. The film shows me when I was in administration. But I went to camp, I think most of my high school at that particular camp. And what was important for me, and I think for all of us, was it was an opportunity to spend time together, both having fun, but equally importantly, really beginning to question what our life would look like, and really enabling us to begin to think about how society on its own was not really going to be opening doors, and we really needed to begin to think about ourselves as belonging. And I think it also was an incredibly important period of time where we recognized that we could look at doing things individually, but collectively we'd be able to get a lot more done. I think that continues to be reflected in the film.
Absolutely. And speaking to what you just said, what really resonates with me is your message that this has to be a collective effort. We have to band together, and even thinking about the definition of disability and understanding that so many disabilities are non-apparent. Disabilities can be acquired throughout someone's lifetime. We all have to understand that if we identify with any one of those types of disabilities, if we acquire anything in our lifetime later on, we still have the power and the ability to share our story and speak up on behalf of our experiences and as part of that community. So that really goes along with one of my favorite moments in the film when the camp director, Larry, states, "We discovered that the problem wasn't with people with disabilities, but rather it was with people without disabilities, so it was up to us." And I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more. Do you feel like people's attitude towards individuals with disabilities, towards the inclusion and employment of people with disabilities has in fact changed?
I was really fortunate and did an interview with Trevor Noah on March 4th. And the reason I mention it, and I presume you can get it on YouTube, the reason I mention it is because he used a term, oh my goodness, what the heck was it? It had the word able in it. I'm sorry, I'm totally speaking.
Yeah, I think he said able-bodied.
Oh, able-bodied, thank you very much, Tiffany.
Yeah.
And I don't use the word able-bodied. I don't use the word able, because to me, using the word able implies that I'm not. And, we're talking about disability from a pride perspective, so I really don't like messing around with the word. But in answer to your question, I think his response, when I said, I don't use able-bodied, I call you non-disabled, his response, I think, was very genuine. And when he said, are you threatening me? I think there was a lot more behind that. And that being that people are afraid of acquiring a disability. And I think that's really one of the key issues that we're always dealing with. People with invisible disabilities not necessarily wanting to disclose because something adverse can happen. If you didn't anticipate that something adverse would happen, why wouldn't one disclose? So it's really those people who have visible disabilities where we can't not disclose. But even within the community of people with visible disabilities, people frequently not want to associate with other people who have visible disabilities because people are wanting to hide as much as possible. So, have we made progress? I would say we have made some progress. Obviously, the movement has grown. But when you think about in the US, we say there are 56 million disabled people. There are not millions of disabled people who are really proud of who they are and coming out openly as a disabled person. And really, that's not a criticism because I really, people will call me all the time and say, I'm going for a job interview. Should I ask for an accommodation? Should I disclose? And it's very personal. And it really depends, from my perspective, on what the law requires, but then also what the hiring manager is asking. So if the hiring manager is saying, we are looking for disabled people, so if you wish to disclose, we welcome it. That's one thing. But if you don't get that sense, then very likely you're not. So yes, things are improving, but media, as an example, while there definitely have been improvements in my lifetime on representation of disabled people in media, I think it's way less than representation of other groups within the diversity community. I mean, really, when I look at advertisements, I'm 72. When I look at advertisements in television, the changes that have gone on from the 50s and 60s through today, when you look at disability, we're happy that more things are happening, but it's not on parity. And the diversity by disability and race and religion and sexual orientation is really not highlighted either.
Absolutely. And Tiffany, I wanted to turn to you because you and I have talked about this a little bit when it comes to perceived abilities of people's disabilities, how there is stigma and bias and stereotype, and we just all have to recognize that that exists. And I was wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, your perspective on perceived abilities and even how you became more confident, that journey to becoming more confident in sharing a bit of your story.
Sure, thank you. And I'm so excited to be part of this panel with Judy and Alex. So I'll just put that first. But I acquired my disability when I was 9. I was involved in a car accident. My dad, who was driving, unfortunately passed away, and I paralyzed my right arm. So I actually wear this kind of awesome splint, which if you look really closely, I had the word proud written on it, which is a very recent thing. But I think coming from an Asian cultural background, so I'm a first generation daughter of an immigrant from Taiwan and a refugee from the Vietnam War. Disability, huge amounts of shame. A parent passing away, a death in the family, like not even talking about it. Having any trauma or mental health conditions like don't exist within my own upbringing of growing up in an Asian family. And so I kind of wish I went to camp. I wore long sleeves all the time. Physical education class was my most traumatizing experiences growing up. And I actually didn't identify as disabled until 12 years after the accident. And I think that this journey to becoming proud of my disability identity really came with the creation of this disability advocacy organization that I'm now working on. But I had no role models. I had no one to tell me that I could feel empowered and strong in my narrative. And honestly, and Sarah, you and I chatted about this, I really think it was that first internship at Goldman where I was, it was very cutthroat, it was very competitive. I got no easy passes that made me realize like, oh, I can actually exist and thrive in this environment, but everyone around me up until that point treated me like I was going to fail or that I needed an easy button for life or I needed help with everything. And I want to acknowledge that interdependence is very important. There are things that I do need help with, but let me decide those for myself and bring those to the table before having other people assert them onto me.
mean, I think what's interesting, Tiffany, about what you're saying is that you were able to get an internship with Goldman Sachs, right? So that is an area where you've seen real changes. That companies like this, which, 20 years ago, might not well have looked at you as someone who could be an intern. So it's interesting, you get into that organization, a very well established, really creating your opportunity for credentials for other employment. And at the same time, your need and desire to also be able to identify as a disabled person. For me, that would be interesting. What made you and when feel that it was important that you acknowledge disability as a part of the totality of who you are?
That's a great question. I mean, and I think when I acquired a disability, I'm going to go through stages of grief. And I don't know how long that journey is, right? And Judy, you talked about self-disclosure, right? It's a journey. It's a journey for everyone. I mean, honestly, I think so. I'll take a step back and say I was affiliated with a nonprofit organization that was focused on trying to get more disabled students into internships with their partner organizations. And as part of that, they hosted these networking sessions with recruiters where it was all disabled candidates talking to the recruiters. And I am a left-handed handshaker. And I was telling Sarah that for a long time, I attempted to try and shake people's hands with my right hand, like a hand that doesn't really move that much, just to try and cover, or, as Alex will sometimes call, like, my own internalized ableism coming out, that if everyone is shaking with their right hand, I need to shake with mine as well. But being able to go to this networking session was the first place where I felt like everyone had something. Maybe it was my like career version of Camp Jeanette, where it was like I just showed up and I didn't need to explain myself and I didn't need to ask for permission. I could just talk about the job and what my qualifications were. I honestly think that it was after that internship that allowed me to start to explore more of my identity, because to be honest, during that internship was the first time I acknowledged that women are a minority within the finance industry. And I started to go to, and I started getting invited to all these women's events, and I was like, oh, this is so bizarre. And I will add, in addition to that, I actually didn't identify as Asian until I went to college, because I grew up in Maryland suburbia where I wasn't surrounded by a lot of Asian people. And so no one talked to me about what that identity meant. And my parents were all about assimilation, right? Success for my Asian immigrant family was about looking and talking and acting like everyone else. So just everything about my identity, I think, got unlocked when I started to enter these corporate spaces that had these affinity groups or these employee resource groups that allowed you to sit in community in whatever that underrepresented identity was.
Right.
And Alex, I want to turn to you, because going along with what Tiffany just said, and Tiffany, thank you so much for sharing your story with the group and for talking about your life experiences, those personal experiences of having acquired a disability. I mean, I can hear and see that you have become more confident in sharing that and comfortable in sharing that. And that's huge, because that's what we need people to do, is to feel comfortable at their own time, of course, to share that story for representation, to encourage others to share their stories as well. And Alex, I know you and I talked about intersectionality, which is where I think a lot of this is going right now. Tiffany, you touched on a number of different things: being a woman, being an Asian American, having a disability, an acquired disability. And Alex, we talked about the fact that disability is cultural. Like any of these other diversity demographics, disability is cultural too. And I think part of the issue with the employment rate of people with disabilities not being as high as it could be is the fact that we're forgetting to look at disability holistically. Sometimes we put on our recruiting hat, our talent acquisition and we think, okay, now I need to hire veterans, and now I need to hire people with disabilities. And it's breaking all of those diversity demographics into individual categories versus remembering that they can all intersect with one another. So I was asking you, I would love for you to share your thoughts on that as well in your personal experiences.
Yeah, thank you. I think talking about disability holistically, approaching this conversation from an intersectional lens really elevates it to this space of disability justice where we're trying to acknowledge the disparities within the disability community, right? And who might have privilege in some ways and might have marginalizations in others. If you're thinking about hiring, a space could be, the pinnacle of, access, right? It could have universal design. You could have all of the disability, the trappings to make it inclusive for disabled people. And if all of the CEOs, all of the directors are white, right? If you have hiring recruiters who are white or perpetuate racial microaggressions, right? If you're a Black or brown disabled person, maybe your disability is attended to, but your racial identity is being erased, right? Or affronted. In my workshops, tangible examples that because microaggressions can get really murky to kind of parse out. If you have bathrooms in a space that are and still binary, right? They still have men and women's bathrooms. If you are a trans or gender nonconforming, if you're a genderqueer disabled person, maybe that doesn't feel safe for you to use, right? And so you're attending to disability, but you're not attending to gender or queerness. And so if it's an all gender bathroom that's accessible, you're now looking at how those things come together, and you're celebrating the intersection of those. For myself, that's where that a lot of this came together. Tiffany talking about unlocking identities really resonated with me. Growing up in central Pennsylvania as, born with a disability, I didn't really have a lot of possibility models for queerness, for racial justice, right, for disability justice. And so as I kind of like moved through the world, I moved to Miami for undergrad, and I moved to San Francisco for grad school. Coming to San Francisco and like meeting queer people, I identified as gay in Miami because I mostly had gay representation around me, right? And San Francisco unlocked this like queerness that I find so fascinating. Same with disability. I hadn't seen people fight for disability before moving here, and in my first semester of grad school saw a documentary about the 504 sit-ins, right? And so to see people like Judy and all of those organizers like leading with pride around their disability was what informed their success, right? And their mission, their vision. I think finding all of those things to be able to come together and finding community where that can be celebrated, right? I think that's something else that's coming up for me in both of what Tiffany and Judy shared is community is really key. I think when you're an individual, it's hard to feel a sense of the systemic nature of things, right? It can be really easy to individualize and internalize, oh, I didn't get that job because, I didn't interview well enough, or, the recruiter didn't call me back because I wasn't, I didn't have these qualifications. But when you are in a space, like Tiffany talking about a networking event or at a protest, right, where you can see other people who reflect your experience and have different facets, you can learn from each other and you can start comparing notes and saying, well, this person didn't hire me either, or, this process was really inaccessible for me as well. And then it stops feeling like it's your fault, and then it's actually a systemic thing. And that's why I usually like to push, we're encouraging pride. We want people with disabilities to self-disclose or come out about those things, but what are we doing to create environments where that is safe, right? We're basically asking people to like go into the lion's den in some ways. If owning your disability can create a target on your back or make you more vulnerable, right? I think it's a tall order for somebody who's already experiencing marginalization, as opposed to turning the mirror back, right, on ourselves as as people hiring, as job spaces, what are we doing to facilitate a space where people would want to do that, as opposed to why aren't people self-disclosing?
Yes, and I think one of the number one questions that we receive is, how can we encourage people to self-disclose, to self-identify? We're committed to hiring people with disabilities. We are committed to being more inclusive. But again, now you've taught us and we understand that over 70% of disabilities are non-apparent, or they could be acquired. And to your point, representation, seeing that amongst leadership, seeing that from other employees within the organization is huge. You know, even for me, if I turn to an organization and I see a woman of color in leadership, that speaks volumes to me. So I understand it completely from that perspective personally, and it translates to exactly your point as well for people with disabilities. And we talk about that culture needing to change. So my question is, what else can employers do? What else do you feel that employers need to do? And question for the whole group, to encourage individuals to self-disclose. Is that out of the employer's hands, or is there something that they can do or something they can implement to change their culture?
I mean, I think there are a lot that employers can do, and I was talking about it a little earlier. So if you have a disability, whether it's obvious or not, and you're applying for a job with the company, is that company one which is known to, in fact, have a good cultural environment for diversity? And is disability a part of that? If not, what are they doing to advance disability within the organization? And I want to mention something that Alex said. You know, one of the things that I still see happening is that we've got these disability affinity groups that are being set up. And I'm not against the disability affinity groups at all, but what frequently happens is that all the other affinity groups do not own disability as a part of their affinity groups, regardless, gender, race, Asian, Black, Latino, whatever it may be. Disability is not a part. So we're coming in my view, at a really different level of thinking. You know, more and more people in the disability community, particularly I think within the movement, are really talking about the intersectionality of the individual person. And so, yes, talking about disability may be important, but you're an Asian woman with a disability. So do you have to go to all three groups all the time? Do you feel comfortable if you say, okay, my first thing, I have limited time, the first group I want to go to is the group on women. So when you go to that affinity group for women, is it a racially diverse group on women? Is disability a part of it? Is it something that an employee can feel comfortable talking about? And I think that's a big issue, because I mean, I'm the oldest in this group, and I've, like, since the 90s, have mainly worked in organizations, government organizations, the World Bank, where I am a complete minority on every level. And it is difficult in many ways as a disabled person in organizations that are mainly non-disabled to have a discussion about how you may feel as a disabled, blah, blah, blah. And so to me, an employer that's really interested in hiring disabled people and disabled people from diverse backgrounds or whatever, you need to feel that and smell that and touch that when you're entering the door. You need to see it in pictures. You need to hear it, as I said earlier. The hiring manager. What is the hiring manager doing to let you know that the company is one which supports diversity? This is how it's doing it, and this is what they would welcome you're talking about as a part of the interview, as an example.
Mm-hmm. And even speaking to that point of representation, you know, I'll bring in, for anyone who wasn't aware, there was a drunk history episode about the 504 sit-in, if anybody saw that. And part of the reason why I'm bringing that up and why I love it so much is because the actors used in that episode were people with disabilities. They weren't actors pretending to have disabilities. And Same thing. If you're using images in any of your marketing campaigns, on your website, anywhere that's publicly facing that has your brand associated, can you use real people with disabilities in those images? Are there some of your own employees who have disclosed having disabilities that would feel comfortable sharing their story externally?
And are they on the interviewing committees?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. It's to ensure that you have a group of diverse individuals reviewing decisions that are made from all different perspectives and walks of life. And Tiffany, you were formerly a recruiter, correct? So I'm wondering, can you share some of your experience from that lens on the employment process, you know, being somebody with a disability?
Sure. I mean, just a couple of comments here. I think one, to Alex's point around really rooting ourselves in community, one of the things that I realized after I had started working at Goldman full-time was I became like the disabled go-to person for informational interviews, which I was fine, and I was fine to carry that responsibility. And as a result of having these conversations with more disabled students about, can I see myself pursuing a career in finance? What is that? No one ever talked to me about anything like that before. We actually ended up having at least one person with a disclosed disability in every single investment banking analyst class after that. And I can't take full responsibility for that, but I think that once you open your doors as an employer to the possibility and the opportunity and the amazingness that is within this disability community, you will unlock so many amazing things. The second thing I think is to Judy's point, which is around intersectionality. And to be honest, so after I worked at Goldman, then I worked at Bloomberg, and I co-founded Bloomberg's employee resource group for employees with disabilities and their allies. And we talk so much about intersectionality. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's when you hold multiple oppressed or marginalized identities. I honestly, I don't think we're doing a good job of that within disability. I think we're trying. I show up in Asian spaces and I'm going off on my disability tangent, you know, and so I think that to the extent that we feel, you know, and the three of us on this call, we are very visible. And I do take that responsibility seriously of, you know, there are Asian people who follow me, there are women who follow me, there are disabled people who follow me. How can I make sure, and then I'm also like trauma informed in my work. It's like, how can I make sure I'm just interlacing all of these things together no matter what space I show up in?
Why were you saying that we in the disability community are not doing a good job on this? And the reason did I understand you right?
Of intersectionality, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I'm saying that is absolutely, that's a legitimate comment. But I also feel we do not speak about other groups, other diverse groups, and their failure to recognize disabled people as a part of their groups. So again, we're putting the onus completely on ourselves. And that's what I'm saying. It really needs to be, as we're saying, a partnership. Yeah. It has to be a conscious partnership. I'm sorry, Alex.
Oh, no, I'm agreeing with that. I think it's kind of to the point that I was making earlier, right? It's like, are we holding both truths? You know, are we challenging ourselves within the community to be accountable, and also, you know, are other groups holding themselves accountable? So it's not just one side doing all the work. I think, you know, Judy and Tiffany also brought up really important points that, oh, sorry, Tiffany, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you can finish your thought.
I think, you know, the idea of like employing disabled people or like celebrating their expertise, right? Whether it's at an employee resource group or Judy mentioned like hiring committees. I think that's really essential, right? Is that we're celebrating and like compensating, right? Disability experience and expertise. I think one of the dangers is that, as Tiffany mentioned, people can just start going to disabled people to be like the token, right? Like, you get it, answer this question, do this interview, be in this picture, you know, we're going to lift you up. And, you know, are they being cared for, right? I think oftentimes it can fall on people to like fix the environment, but that's not even their job.
Yeah.
Right. And so now somebody's expected to do all of their regular job responsibilities and also make their work environment accessible and welcoming to them. And so
A very important point, which needs to be made within the companies. It's the marginalization of the few people that are within the organizations and the burden that it puts on people, which is something you're asked to do something, you believe it's an important thing to do. If you don't do it, it's not going to get done. And that speaks to the bigger problem. And that's why I think we need, you know, I'm talking with a particular company and they're advancing the work that they're doing in disability. And, you know, they do human resource training. And some of the training is required for managers. But at this point, training, including disability, under the required training, how can I say simply? The training, the mandatory training in the area of human resources does not include disability. They're developing some other things. And my experience has been, if you don't integrate disability into, in this case, discussions around human resources and make it equally important to the other communities that you're discussing, it will not be taken seriously because it continues to be marginalized. And yes, it's great that, you know, it's moving forward, not a criticism, it's great companies are doing this, but I think there needs to be some real serious looking at what it means when you are not including disability, which is what we're discussing today, as a central part of all the diversity work that's happening. You can have your separate affinity groups across the board, but one of the messages also needs to be that, as we've been saying, like, I'm a disabled Jewish woman. And for me, as a Jew, one of the issues that I've dealt with for many, many years has been not being considered to be equal within the community. Well, to be able to have those discussions, even within the Jewish community, has been very difficult. More and more things have been going on over the years, so there's a little more genuineness happening, but it takes years. And that's why I think the sooner employers who sincerely are advancing diversity bring everyone to the same table, because the messages are very similar. We may need accommodations, like, you know, childcare, that was never considered an accommodation. But the reality is childcare is an accommodation. And once it was finally accepted, it allowed women to be able to work more in the workforce. So anyway, I want to hear employers looking at what they're doing in other areas of diversity. I want to hear them talking about their genuine interest and actions that they're taking to really mainstream disability into their work. And as other people have been saying, their advertising, you know, their pictures, whatever it may be, as well as in the actual deeds.
if I can add to that, Judy, I think one of the dangers of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is that people want immediate results. I think they expect that, like, okay, well, you know, Judy said, change our marketing material, change our recruiters, make sure that we have representation. Like, let's say you wave a magic wand and you do that all in the next calendar year, to expect disabled people to all of a sudden trust these large companies and institutions after decades of being marginalized and oppressed, I think is really short-sighted and like ignorant of how, you know, institutional and generational trauma works. You know, even if we look at, like, you know, the sit-ins, you know, 504 protests were in 77, the ADA was signed in 90, right? It's like, we're, you know, if we use the ADA as an example, it's almost 30 years old this year and we're still having these conversations. So to expect people to all of a sudden let down their guards and just like come flooding into the doors because a few changes have been made, I think is going to set people up for frustration. And so how do we have conversations about the like deep cultural work required to achieve the success that you're aspiring for? And like, how do we move away from like deliverables or outcomes that are like quantifiable and more of the like qualitative lived experience, the stories that come out of these connections, I think will inform how successful this is going, as opposed to saying, well, we didn't hit these recruiting numbers, so obviously none of this is working and it's not worth our money or our budget.
I think companies that are, and certainly there are really more and more companies recognizing that diversity improves their work. Mm-hmm. The discussion that you're having right now, come on in. The discussion that we're having right now, which is focusing on disability, can focus on any one of the diverse communities we're talking about. If an organization is really trying to be transformational, it also needs to recognize that in order for people to do their best work, they need to be able to feel comfortable. And comfort is good management, understanding what their job requires, et cetera, but it also is feeling comfortable in the environment. And I think that's something that other groups should be able to talk about, and I'm sure they are. What are things that are going on to allow people from the LGBT community in a business to feel respected and have equal opportunities within the company? What did it look like 5 years ago? What does it look like now? What are the changes that were made? When looking at disability, how can we advance more rapidly what we've learned in other areas? How can the disabled employees also learn about what else has happened? And how do you bring in the African American, disabled, gay woman, So I think we need to really look at which companies are mixing it up the best and where you can see progress in evaluations on culture within the organizations and use them as examples also.
To touch on some of those points that Alex, you made, and Judy, that you made, what I'm hearing as well in saying that partnership. So to bring it back to what you said, Judy, if it has to be a partnership, we're taking it on ourselves, and that can't be the case because it's too much to try to take on. When I think of partnership and hearing this discussion, that means even if you are somebody who does not have a disability, if you are in an affinity group, if you're an employee resource group for women, let's say, it is your responsibility, it's all of our responsibilities to bring in the other diversity aspects into that conversation. So to say, yes, we're talking about this, but have we talked about disability? Have we talked about equity as well for LGBTQ and for racial minorities too? And it's to be as forward as I possibly can about it. I think it is our job to say that it's not good enough if leadership, if employers, if anybody else above us who we even feel holds the power to make decisions is saying we're not ready for disability trainings. We're not ready to make that required. We're just not there yet. I think it's where true definition of partnership is that it's all of our responsibilities to step up and say, but why? And to question that. And so that it's not just somebody with a disability who has to come forward and question that or feel like they're sitting in silence and they don't have others to speak up for the importance of that as well. So I think it's incredibly important for all of us to take that away from today's discussion, and that we all have to do a better job of that for talking about diversity in every aspect and bringing that into the conversation and the intersectionality of all those demographics for us to be talking about that in every sense possible. And Judy, I saw the interview that you did with Trevor Noah, and one of the examples that I love that you gave is you said that you're local to me. I'm right outside of Baltimore, Maryland, in DC, and accommodations, inclusion of people with disabilities benefits everybody. It is universal in that sense. So how many times on the metro do you see parents, moms using baby carriages and they're having trouble accessing the metro and getting on and off. So something that you might think of as a wheelchair ramp or something specifically for disabilities benefits everybody as well. So I loved that example that you gave. I love that message as well.
But it's interesting. I think that, you know, I love being at a metro station when there are all these men and women with baby carriages and saying to them, do you know why we have these elevators? And they'll frequently mention ADA, but the reality is it was way before ADA that this came about. But I don't know that that people complain if the elevators are broken. You know, I don't know that they see it yet as a right that they should anticipate.
Mhm.
So I think that's also something. I think organizations like Disability In are important because they are focusing on working with employers, National Organization on Disability, and many others that are working with larger companies, looking at ways of really learning about the work that they're doing. And I think, you know, I was looking at the website last night for hire,
Getting hired.
sorry,
Getting hired.
getting hired, thank you. So at least, you know, you go on there and it's a job board, right? So they've got all these jobs listed, which is great. There isn't anything in the beginning which talks about the issue of diversity and how, you know, some kind of a statement that these companies are respectful of diversity and are doing work in this area. It might be, you know, good to be able to look at having some statements on a board like that, which could allow someone to get a better understanding. Not a lot, or even a link, you know, to their websites, which talks about this diversity, might be valuable for a prospective employee. Because I think, you know, one of the issues that goes on is people are afraid sometimes to apply. And of course, people are afraid when they apply for jobs in general. But if you don't really know whether or not a particular company is really focusing on disability plus, or disability alone, or disability plus plus plus, it might make you a little hesitant, more hesitant.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in 2008 when I interviewed at Goldman, they had like a list of like 10 to 14 values. And one of them, I think it was like number 7, was like, diversity is not what we must strive for, it's what we must be. And I actually brought that up in my interview. And I said, and Sarah, you and I have talked about this, but the former CEO and the former president of Goldman both had disabilities. They were invisible, but there's public.
Disclose?
What's that?
Did they disclose?
So Lloyd Blankfein diagnosed with lupus, I believe, during his time. And then Gary Cohn is dyslexic. But yeah, I think for me to be able to both see that in the values and then also to see leadership, I mean, they weren't going out and being full-blown disability advocates, but we knew that that was a part of their lived experience that they carried with them. And that made me, you know, think whatever you want about financial institutions, but it made me proud to have a job there.
And I bet it also was a little bit of an incentive to think about wanting to go there, right? It was something that wasn't closeted. It was something which was out there. So that's like a great example, really important example.
Absolutely. And
Can we get rid of this? I'm sorry, earlier we used perceived ability. Why do we have to use that word, perceived ability? I mean, we're talking for employment, we're talking about qualifications.
mm-hmm.
We use the word qualifications. Only in the disability community do we use the word ability. Who else uses the word? I don't know any other group that talks about ability. To me, it's really unintentional, but it's kind of an oppression that we put on ourselves because able is such a charged word. And the fact that, you know, people take the word disabled and take the word able out. Yeah, I just think it's something that we should really seriously think about.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful, and I acknowledge, like, I I know that I am still learning as a leader along the way, and
Wait, when is this person scheduled to come out?
acknowledging kind of the fact that I think this conversation around language, which we didn't really get into, but is much more deeply rooted than we have time for potentially. But I think a lot about the way that I used to talk about my disability to how that narrative has transformed over the past couple of years. And yeah, I mean, I think to Alex's point, I've heard Alex talk about internalized ableism a lot, right? Which is, what are the things that we do to appear more, I was going to use able, but to appear more capable, I guess, in certain situations.
Yeah, maybe I know we're basically at time. I'll just use kind of this conversation about language just as a platform to plug like disability arts and culture. I feel like, you know, so much of what we're trying to do within the workplace can be rooted in just like our professional identities, and then doesn't challenge us to look at how we um, immerse or engage with those communities outside of the workplace. And I feel like there's just so much beautiful disability art and culture. There's Superfest, a disability film festival that happens in the Bay. You can even book them for a showcase. So to bring disability films made by disabled people for disabled people, like Crip Camp, you know, I think that can be a way in our personal lives to start exploring how a diversity of disabled people like experience their lives, write the language that they like to use. You know, as Judy was saying, kind of disability less as something outside of ourselves and more of something that like everybody experiences in our own way. So just kind of using that as an invitation to say, don't just do this work at work, you know, do it in your personal life as well.
I mean, I think the point that Tiffany was making earlier is a very, very important point, at least for me. You know, so you acquired your disability. How old were you?
9.
Okay, and it was a pretty traumatizing experience. Did your father die yeah. So I think, you know, we also are quick to judge sometimes people who acquire their disabilities and really don't look at the fact disability is really unique. You know, you may change your sex, you don't change your race, you know, you don't change certain things you can't change. And so living in a society where there is such bias against disabled people, and where the lack of visibility in and of itself is a bias that says this is something bad. Because if it wasn't something bad, why wouldn't we be seeing it? And in many cases, when we do see it, it's so negative, even if it's not all negative. People killing themselves and bemoaning the fact they have a disability. I really feel that one of the things we need to do is, as a community, recognize more and be there to support newly disabled individuals, whether or not they call themselves disabled or not. Right? I mean, the word is something we own from a political perspective, but and I think many people, as they feel more accepting of themselves, I think, as Tiffany has been explaining, you know, you're still going through transformation. Being able to write about that and sharing those stories in a more public way. I mean, I do this program called The Human Perspective, and you know, we do interviews and post them, try to do like 2 of them a month, and try to do people from different communities who are sharing their stories. But there needs to be so much more of that. I mean, people need to see without even consciously entering saying, I want to learn about disability. No, that should not have to be their agenda. They should be able to see in the workforce, in the, you know, in the supermarkets, in wherever it is, that disability is something which is there, that stories are inclusive, that advertising is inclusive, and that it doesn't only have to be around disability. You know, it could be, you know, a person with a disability who is a bartender, is a speaking about things in the programs they're in. I mean, we all understand that, but I feel like part of what our work is doing is trying to get, obviously, disabled people to this discussion in the workforce. But what we're really working on is allowing disabled people to feel valued as individuals, that our contributions are important, and that friends and family and allies also have important roles that they can play, and that the discourse is so important. The ability to slowly have more honest discussions about how we have been offended and hurt and afraid of coming out and putting your left hand forward as opposed to your right hand. That's a big issue, you know, especially in certain cultures where putting your left hand forward is really bad, right? It's got lots of cultural implications and needing to help people learn. And we do not understand those things across the board. And we need a lot more learning and sharing.
Mm. Absolutely. Tiffany and Alex, do you have any other closing thoughts to piggyback off of what Judy said, or in addition to what she has said?
I'm just very in awe of being on this panel. I feel like I learned so much from every conversation. Thank you, Getting Hired, for facilitating this. I think, yeah, if I can leave you with a parting thought, number one, how can we be more disability centric in all of our work? Number two, how can we have disabled people not only talk about their disability, we're much more interesting than our disability lived experience. And then number three, please hire disabled people. Just do it. That's how we move the needle.
And get people who are already working in your companies to feel comfortable to disclose, because for sure you have disabled people there.
Yeah. 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 I don't know that I can add much more to those points. I'm always grateful to be in conversation with Judy and Tiffany, and I appreciate you facilitating, Sarah. You know, I think we've talked a lot about disability, and I think I just want to offer for anybody, you know, listening who is disabled, just knowing that, you know, we, you know, I think the three of us have been, I don't want to speak for the other two, but it seems like from what I've learned and what I see, it seems like disability inspires us and provides that fire for us to be the leaders that we are. And, you know, however that might play out for you in your life and your work, I just really want disabled people to feel, you know, not kind of waiting to get the support, but that it exists already, and that we have people who are looking out for you.
And I want to say thank you very much. I think this has been a great opportunity. I'm sorry I forgot the term getting hired.
That's okay. Not a problem. It's not a problem at all. There's lots of organizations with probably some similar type of phrasing there, so not a problem. But
yes, there is. I'm sorry. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I'm sure that many of the companies that are listening today are also international companies. And so while I think we're mainly focusing on US issues today, you know, our goal, all of us on this panel, is to really look at not only what goes on within the US, but US organizations that are overseas. And points that have been made by Alex and Tiffany around other, additional areas of diversity, and myself also, I think it's very important to really learn more about what's going on, what disability specifically means within the country that you're working in. Tiffany's points were really important, and obviously we had a very short period of time. But this is why I think, you know, when we're talking about disability across the board, we really do need, and it's not just, you know, you can't like, for example, put the Asian community into one pot. There's so many different communities and there's so many different views, and you can look at this in many different ways, but it's complex, but it's so fascinating, so interesting. And I think at the end of the day, disability and companies that are really looking at this as an opportunity can make a tremendous difference, not just in the lives of disabled people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think bottom line is we all need to do more. This is everyone's responsibility to do more and to form a partnership and to speak up and create that platform within organizations. So I sincerely want to thank Judy, Tiffany, Alex for joining us today and for sharing your stories, your experiences, and perspectives and advice. This has been an honor for me to be a part of, and I want to